But objectivism.
Objectivism. So, and so she developed it for a novel. She spent the latter part of her life after the publication of Atlas Shrugged really articulating her philosophy. So that's what she did. She applied it to politics, to life, to gender, to all these issues from 1957 until she died in 1982.
So the objectivism was born out of the later parts of Atlas Shrugged.
Yes, definitely. It was there all the time, but it was fleshed out during the latter parts of Atlas Shrugged and then articulated for the next 20 years.
So what is objectivism?
So objectivism, there are 5 branches in philosophy, and so I'm going to just go through the branches. You start with metaphysics, the nature of reality. And objectivism argues that reality is what it is. It's kind of harkens back to Aristotle, law of identity. A is A. You can wish it to be B, but wishes do not make something real. Reality is what it is, and it is the primary. And it's not manipulated, directed by consciousness. Consciousness is there to observe, to give us information about reality. That is the purpose of consciousness. That is the nature of it. So in metaphysics, existence exists. The law of identity, the law of causality. Things are, the things act based on their nature, not randomly, not arbitrarily, but based on their nature. And then we have the tool to know reality. This is epistemology, the theory of knowledge. Our tool to know reality is reason. It's our senses and our capacity to integrate the information we get from our senses and to integrate it into new knowledge and to conceptualize it. And that is uniquely human. We don't know the truth from revelation. We don't know truth from our emotions. Our emotions are interesting. Our emotions tell us something about ourselves, but our emotions are not tools of cognition. They don't tell us the truth about what's out there, about what's in reality. So reason is our means of knowledge, and therefore reason is our means of survival. Only individuals reason, just in the same way that only individuals can eat. We don't have a collective stomach. Nobody can eat for me, and therefore nobody can think for me. We don't have a collective mind. There's no collective consciousness. It's bizarre that people talk about these collectivized aspects of the mind. They don't talk about collective feet and collective stomachs and collective things. But so we all think for ourselves, and it is our fundamental basic responsibility to live our lives, to choose to, once we choose to live our lives to the best of our ability. So in morality, she is an egoist. She believes that the purpose of morality is to provide you with a code of values and virtues to guide your life for the purpose of your own success, your own survival, your own thriving, your own happiness. Happiness is the moral purpose of your life. The purpose of morality is to guide you towards a happy life.
Your own happiness.
Your own happiness. Absolutely. Your own happiness. So she rejects the idea that you should live for other people, that you should live for the purpose of other people's happiness. Your purpose is not to make them happy or to make them anything. Your purpose is your own happiness. But she also rejects the idea that you could argue maybe the Nietzschean idea of you should use other people for your own purposes, right? So every person is an end in himself. Every person's moral responsibility is their own happiness. And you shouldn't use other people for your own, shouldn't exploit other people for your own happiness, and you shouldn't allow yourself to be exploited for other people. Mm-hmm. Every individual is responsible for themselves. And what is it that allows us to be happy? What is it that facilitates human flourishing, human success, human survival? Well, it's the use of our minds, right? Goes back to reason. And what does reason require in order to be successful, in order to work effectively? It requires freedom. So the enemy of reason is force. The enemy of reason is coercion. The enemy of reason is authority, right? The Catholic Church doing what they did to Galileo, right? That restricts Galileo's thinking, right? When he's in house arrest, is he going to come up with a new theory? Is he going to discover new truths? No, it's the punishment is too, it's too dangerous. So force, coercion, are enemies of reason, and what reason needs is to be free, to think, to discover, to innovate, to break out of convention. So we need to create an environment in which individuals are free to reason, free to think. And to do that, we come up with a concept. Historically, we've come up with a concept of individual rights. Individual rights define the scope of, define the fact that we should be left alone, free to pursue our values, using our reason, free of what? Free of coercion, force, authority. And that the job of government is to make sure that we are free. The whole point of government, the whole point of when we come in a social context, the whole point of establishing a government in that context is to secure that freedom. Mm-hmm. It's to make sure that I don't use coercion on you. The government is supposed to stop me, it's supposed to intervene before I can do that, or if I've already done it, to prevent me from doing it again. So the purpose of government is to protect our freedom to think and to act based on our thoughts. It's to leave individuals free to pursue their values, to pursue their happiness, to pursue their rational thought, and to be left alone to do it. And so she rejects socialism, which basically assumes some kind of collective goal, assumes the sacrifice of the individual to the group, assumes that your moral purpose in life is the well-being of other people rather than your own. And she rejects all form of statism, all form of government that is, overly that is involved in any aspect other than to protect us from force, coercion, authority. And she rejects anarchy, and we can talk about that. I think you had a question in the list of questions you sent me about anarchy. So
sure.
I'm happy to discuss
to Michael Malice about anarchy. So
what's that? Yes,
I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yes, I'm familiar with him. So she would completely rejects anarchy. Anarchy is completely inconsistent with her point of view, and we can talk about why if you want.
So there's some perfect place where freedom is maximized. So systems of government that
absolutely, and she thought that the American system of government came close in its idea, obviously founded with original sin, with the sin of slavery, but in its conception, the Declaration of Independence is about as perfect a political document as one could write. I think the greatest political document in human history, but really articulated almost perfectly and beautifully. And that the American system of government, with its checks and balances, which is with its emphasis on individual rights, with its emphasis on freedom, with its emphasis on leaving individual free to pursue their happiness, and the explicit recognition of happiness as the goal, individual happiness, it was the model. It wasn't perfect. There were a lot of problems, to a large extent because the founders had mixed philosophical premises. So there were alien premises introduced into the founding of the country, slavery obviously being the biggest problem. But it was close. And we need to build on that to create an ideal political system that will, yes, maximize the freedom of individuals to do exactly this. And then, of course, she had, so that's kind of, that's the manifestation of this individualism in the political realm. And she had a theory of art. She had a theory of aesthetics, which is the fifth branch of she have metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and politics. And the fifth branch is aesthetics. And she viewed art as an essential human need, a fuel for the human spirit. And that just like any human need, it had certain principles that it had to abide by. That is just like there's nutrition, right? So some food is good for you and some food is bad for you. Some stuff is poison. Mm-hmm. She believed the same is true of arts, that art had an identity, which is very controversial today, right? If today it's, if you put a frame around it, it is art, right? If you put a urinal in a museum, it becomes art, which she thought was evil and ludicrous, and she rejected completely. That art had an identity, and that it served a certain function, that human beings needed it. Mm-hmm. And if it didn't have, not only did it have the identity, but that function was served well by some art and poorly by other art. And then there's a whole realm of stuff that's not art, basically. All of what today is considered modern art, she would consider as not being art. Splashing paint on a canvas, not art. So she had very clear ideas. She articulated them not in conventional philosophical form. Mm-hmm. So she didn't write philosophical essays using the philosopher's language. It's partially why I think philosophers have never taken it seriously. They're actually accessible to us. Mm-hmm. We can actually read them. And she integrates the philosophy in what I think are amazing ways with psychology, with history, with economics, with politics, with what's going on in the world. And she has dozens and dozens and dozens of essays that she wrote. Many of them were aggregated into books. I particularly recommend books like The Virtue of Selfishness, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and Philosophy, Who Needs It? And you know, I think it's a beautiful philosophy. I know you're big on love. I think it's a philosophy of love. We can talk about that. Essentially, it's about love. That's what the philosophy is all about, and when it in terms of it applying to self. I think it's sad that so few people read it, and so few intellectuals take it seriously and are willing to engage with it.
Let me ask. That was incredible. But after that beautiful whirlwind overview, let me ask the most shallow of questions, which is the name Objectivism. Mm-hmm. Of where, like, how should people think about the name being rooted? Why not individualism? What are the options? If we're like had a branding meeting right now.
Sure. So she actually had a branding meeting. So she did this. She went through the exercise. Objectivism, I don't know all the details, but I don't think Objectivism was the first name she came with. The problem was that the other names were taken and they were not positive implications.
Got it.
So for example, rationalism could have been a good word because she's an advocate of rational thought. Or reasonism, but reasonism sounds weird, right? Yeah. The ism, because of too many S's, I guess. Rationalism, but it was already a philosophy, and it was a philosophy inconsistent with hers, because it was what she considered a false view of reason, of rationality. Realityism, just doesn't work. So she came on Objectivism, and I think actually it's a great word. It's a great name because it has two aspects to it, and this is a unique view of what objectivity actually means. In objectivity is the idea of an independent reality. There is truth. Mm-hmm. There's actually something out there and then there's the role of consciousness, right? There is the role of figuring out the truth. The truth doesn't just hit you. The truth is not in the thing. You have to discover it. It's that a consciousness applied to. That's what objectivity is, right? It's you discovering the truth in reality. It's your consciousness interacting.
And thereby pulls in the individual in that sense.
And only the individual could do it. Now, the problem with individualism is it would have made the philosophy too political.
Right.
And she always said, she said, I'm an advocate for capitalism because I'm really an advocate for rational egoism. But I'm an advocate for rational egoism really because I'm an advocate for reason. So she viewed the essential of her philosophy as being this reason and her particular view of reason. And she has a whole book. She has a book called Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, which I encourage any scientist, mathematician, anybody interested in science to read, because it is a tour de force on in a sense, what it means to hold concepts and what it means to discover new discoveries and to use concepts and how we use concepts. And she has a theory of concepts that is completely new, that is completely revolutionary, and I think is essential for the philosophy of science, and therefore ultimately for the more abstract we get with scientific discoveries, the easier it is to detach them from reality and to detach them from truth. The easier it is to be inside our heads instead of about what's real. Mm-hmm. And there are probably examples from modern physics that fit that. And I think what she teaches in the book is how to ground your concepts and how to bring them into grounding in reality. So Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, and note that it's only an introduction, because one of the things she realized, one of the things that I think a lot of her critics don't give enough credit for, is that philosophy there's no end, right? Mm-hmm. It's always growing. There are always new discoveries. There's always, it's like science. There's always new things. And there's a ton of work to do in philosophy, and particularly in epistemology and the theory of knowledge. And she was actually, given your interest in mathematics, she actually saw a lot of parallels between math and concept formation. Mm-hmm. And she was actually, in the years before she died, she was taking private lessons in mathematics, in algebra and calculus, because she believed that there was real insight in understanding algebra and calculus to philosophy, into epistemology. And she also was very interested in neuroscience, because she believed that had a lot to tell us about epistemology, but also about music, therefore about aesthetics. So, I mean, she recognized the importance of all these different fields, and how, and the beauty of philosophy is it should be integrating all of them. And one of the sad things about the world in which we live is, again, we view these things as silos. We don't view them as integrating. We don't have teams of people from different different fields, discovering things. We become like ants, specialized. So she was definitely like that, and she was constantly curious, constantly interested in new discoveries and new ideas, and how this could expand the scope of her philosophy and the application of her philosophy.